Guys, I have to be honest, I've made a big mistake. I've made hundreds of videos that talk about things like intonation and stress, yet I haven't done a good job of explaining what is the difference between them. What makes intonation, like rising or falling, different than stress? Like I'm stressing it, but what does that mean? Hey guys, this is Jeff with Fluent American, and I want to explain these two concepts, starting with intonation, specifically falling intonation. We've talked about this before, but with falling intonation, notice that it's like you're starting from a high point, but you're ending at a lower point. Fall. For those of you who speak tonal languages, for instance like Mandarin, usually these languages have a falling intonation. Again, in the case of Mandarin, it's like your fourth tone, like fall, fall. But when do we use this? So falling intonation is firstly used with simple sentences, think like facts or routines, situations like that. This pen is black. Notice how I said the word black there, right? That's a falling intonation. Black, black. Falling intonation, though, is also used for questions, which may surprise you. A lot of times when people learn English, they're taught that when you ask questions, you want to raise your voice, use a rising intonation. But if the question is an information question, using words like what or how or why, question words like that, you're usually going to have a falling intonation at the end. Now, in contrast to that falling type of intonation, there's rising intonation, or like rise, rise. And again, it's the opposite. You start from a low point and then you want to end at a high point. Rising intonation has a couple of functions as well. Firstly, it's used to show a yes-no question. Did you see that fly? So if you ask a question and the answer can either be yes or no, then that means your question probably had a rising intonation. Rising intonation, though, is also useful for letting the person you're talking to know that you're not finished speaking. So maybe you're explaining an idea, it's taking you some time, and you want to show that you haven't finished. Some common situations where you'll see this are, for instance, think of like commas. And when you're reading a sentence and you see a comma, usually it's going to be a rising intonation. There are also some words that usually indicate that you're not done talking. Words like because, or I was late because there was traffic. Before we get into another type of intonation, I just really quickly want to practice these. I'm going to give you some sentences. The first time is going to have rising intonation. The second one is going to have falling intonation. I encourage you to repeat after me. They did. They did. It is. It is. Really? Really. Now, I'm going to say a word, and I want you to try to guess if it has falling or rising. Summer? No. What? When? How? Which of those did you find hardest? Let me know in the comments. Now, there's another intonation pattern that I think is going to be particularly helpful for you because it's really common, but it's not something that's always described. And this is like a
wavering intonation,
or like a fall rise intonation. And what this does is it changes the meaning of your sentence a little bit emotionally. It can make, for instance, something sound a little friendlier, or it can invite a question. To give you an example, let's say that I needed to call a doctor's office. I pick up a phone, I give them a call, and the first thing they may say is doctor's office, kind of like a falling intonation. And that just sounds a little bit cold. It's very formal, it's very professional sounding, but there's not a whole lot of emotion attached to it. Whereas if you said something like doctor's office, it's kind of like asking like, hey, this is the doctor's office. Why did you call? Are you trying to schedule an appointment? Things like that. So it just sounds a little bit friendlier when you have this fall rise. Office versus office, which is just a fall. It's also something that you can use to show a little bit of
frustration,
especially in situations that use contrastive stress. If you're not sure what contrastive stress is, be sure to check out our video. But here's a quick example. Let's say you told someone to do something and they did the opposite. I know this can, for instance, happen with pets, like my dog. I said on the pillow, not the couch. All of this talk about intonation is a little bit different than stress. Now, we've talked about stress. I have a whole playlist of videos that just talk about stress, so check those out as well. But stress is talking about the
Emphasized word.
in a sentence, and usually there are two ways of showing it. The first way is raising the pitch. If you don't know what the pitch is, think of like a piano. On the left side and on the right side, you have the same notes, but the pitch is
Higher.
on the right hand side and it's
Lower.
on the left hand side. So again, to show stress, you want to raise the pitch more. And the other thing that you often do is you hold the vowel
Longer.
to give you some practice with stress. Take a look at this sentence. I'm going to say it 3 times, and each time is going to have a different stressed word. Yesterday was long. Yesterday was long. Yesterday was long. Can you hear how each of those sentences is a little bit different than the last? This is because what I'm doing is I'm changing the stress on each of them. Stress is super important because English is a stress-timed language. So that's what your listener is trying to identify when you talk. Think of it, if you've ever taken like an IELTS test or a TOEFL test, or you've ever listened to something and there's some words that you understand, but there's other words you're like, I don't know anything that they just said. The words that you heard most clearly are probably going to be the stressed words. The words that you didn't hear clearly are probably the words that were not stressed. But let's do some more practice. I'm going to say for you 3 sentences, and I want you to try to identify which word is stressed. The movie tickets were expensive. I haven't seen her in ages. That was the last one. Which words there do you think were stressed? Be sure again to let me know below. Now, stress and intonation, again, they're different topics, but they can be confusing. So some little suggestions I have. Oftentimes, stressed words have a falling type of intonation to them. Not always, but it is something that can be common. Let's take a look at this through the use of compound nouns. Compound nouns are situations where 2 or more words join together and they make a single word. Not sure what that means? Understandable. So here's an example. A movie ticket. Movie ticket. A movie ticket is a specific thing. It's a specific type of ticket. So this would be a compound noun. You would want to stress movie. Movie ticket. Movie ticket. Notice that the word movie there has a pretty strong falling intonation. How about in an example sentence? I bought 2 movie tickets. I bought 2 movie tickets. Notice that the stress is on movie and the intonation on movie would be falling. One thing we mentioned earlier too is that stressed words are often held longer as well. But you want to be careful because just because a word is held longer doesn't necessarily mean it's a word that's stressed. For instance, at the end of a group of words, when you're trying to link to another part of your sentence, one technique that's often used is to hold that sound a little longer. To give you a quick example of this, I went to the barber so I could get a haircut. Notice, what word do you think is being stressed there? Barber. I went to the barber, so, but notice that so is just held so long. But just because so is held longer, it's not really the stressed word. The heavier stress is barber. You can tell because of the higher pitch. I went to the barber, so takes up more time, but it's not actually the stress because it's actually linking to the next part of the sentence. Typically when this happens, when you're holding that sound a little bit longer to link to what you want to say next, you often will notice a slight rising intonation. So, and this again goes back to what we mentioned earlier, where we said rising intonation can be used to show that you're not done talking or to show that you have more to say. Let's end by taking a look at 2 sentences and looking at them for stress and intonation patterns. If I knew you were coming, I'd have cooked. Some key things you want to notice first, stress. If I knew you were coming, you can maybe say there's a slight stress on knew, but I think a heavier stress is going to be on coming. If I knew you were coming, I'd have cooked. Heavier stress there at the end is going to be on cooked. How about for intonation patterns? Coming, that is going to have a rising intonation because there's more information after it. Oftentimes when you see a comma, the word before the comma is going to have a rise. Not always, but in general, it's pretty common. At the end of a sentence, like we mentioned earlier, for facts or just general statements, you're going to use a falling intonation. I'd have cooked. The last time I went, it rained. Where's our stress in the first part of this sentence? The answer? Last. The last time I went. How about in the second part of the sentence? It rained. Rained is your stress, and again, notice that falling intonation. To find out which words normally get stress and which words don't get stress, again, be sure to check out this video.